The hum of polite conversation and the click of designer heels filled the air, but Emma Carter moved quietly through it all, invisible to most. She clutched her worn leather bag a little tighter and glanced around. The Galleria was breathtaking, a world away from the small family-owned shops she usually frequented. Today wasn't about her comfort, though. Grandpa Frank's 80th birthday deserved something truly special. Emma took a breath, steadying herself. She wasn't here for showy brands or lavish designer labels. She wanted something real, something with meaning. Daniel's words floated through her mind, unexpected but welcome. The best treasures aren't the ones that scream for attention. They're the ones crafted with soul. A small smile touched her lips. Her husband had a way of finding beauty where others missed it. An eye for craftsmanship, a heart tuned to authenticity. It was one of the things she loved most about him. Even if the rest of the world saw only the man who turned forgotten antiques into fortunes, Emma knew the truth. Daniel Carter valued sincerity over status. Tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, she spotted the store she had come for. Southern Jade and Company. Gleaming green letters arched over the doorway, framed by dark wood and brass fixtures. It looked timeless, elegant. Exactly the kind of place Grandpa Frank would have admired. Emma stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of lavender and polished stone. Glass cases sparkled under soft lights, displaying exquisite jade bangles, intricate necklaces, and serene statues carved with breathtaking detail. Everything radiated quiet luxury. For a moment, Emma simply stood there, taking it all in. She moved cautiously toward a nearby display, careful not to brush against anything too expensive. Behind the counter, a woman in a sharp gray suit glanced up. Josephine Lane. Her name tag gleamed almost as brightly as the polished jade behind her. Her smile flickered for a second, polite but thin, like candlelight about to be snuffed out. "Good morning," Josephine said, her tone smooth as silk but cool underneath. "Can I help you find something?" Emma returned the smile warmly. "Yes, actually. I'm looking for a gift, something simple but meaningful, for my grandfather's birthday." Josephine's eyes flickered down to Emma's modest flats and plain denim jacket. Her smile didn't change, but something in her gaze cooled a few degrees more. "Of course," she said. "Our premium collection is just over here." Emma followed her toward the central displays, her footsteps soft against the marble floor. She couldn't miss the way Josephine subtly angled her body, placing a polite but clear distance between herself and Emma. It wasn't overt, it wasn't rude, but it was unmistakable. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. Emma pretended not to notice. As they reached the cases, Emma's attention was immediately captured by a bracelet resting on a velvet cushion. The jade was a delicate shade of green, the carving of a lotus flower so fine it seemed almost alive. Her fingers itched to reach for it. "This piece," Josephine said crisply, "is part of our imperial line. Hand-carved, ethically sourced, certified grade-A jade. It retails for $12,000. Emma blinked. Her heart sank, but she forced herself to stay composed. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Do you have anything a little simpler? Maybe something under $2,000? For the briefest moment, Josephine's mouth tightened. It was barely perceptible, a flash of judgment tucked neatly away under professional courtesy. "We do have a heritage collection," she said, voice even. "Over there by the entrance." The implication was clear. Emma followed the direction of Josephine's perfectly manicured hand. Tucked into a less conspicuous corner of the store were smaller displays, lovely pieces, but clearly the more affordable offerings. As Emma turned toward them, the entrance bells chimed brightly. She glanced up and immediately wished she hadn't. Chloe Fairfax swept into the store like a gust of designer perfume. Her linen dress fluttered dramatically behind her, and a pair of oversized sunglasses perched artfully atop her perfect blonde hair. Right behind her came Tessa Monroe, the actress with the kind of effortless beauty that made heads turn even in a place like this. Josephine's demeanor transformed instantly. She practically floated toward them, her smile wide and genuine now. "Miss Fairfax, Miss Monroe, welcome back. We have some stunning new arrivals you simply must see." Emma shrank back slightly, pretending to study a modest jade pendant as the store's attention shifted entirely to the newcomers. She wasn't surprised, not really. Charleston, for all its genteel manners, still knew how to whisper judgments behind fans and sweet smiles. Emma picked up a bracelet from the heritage case. The jade was a little cloudier than the premium pieces, but the carving was careful, the lines delicate. She turned it gently between her fingers, imagining Grandpa Frank's rough, weathered hands accepting it with his lopsided grin. A soft voice at her elbow startled her. "If you like the lotus design, there's one here," said Ivy Martin, a young woman with dark curls pinned loosely at her nape. Her store badge glinted under the lights. Emma smiled in genuine relief. "Thank you." Ivy glanced over her shoulder quickly, then lowered her voice. "It's not the price that matters. It's the meaning behind it. My grandma always said that." Emma's throat tightened unexpectedly. She nodded, swallowing past the lump rising there. Behind them, laughter bubbled. Chloe and Tessa stood with Josephine, admiring an elaborate necklace that looked like it belonged in a museum. Chloe's voice, light and airy, carried farther than she intended. "Isn't it adorable when people play dress-up? Bless their hearts." Emma flinched inwardly, but she didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on the bracelet in her hand. She remembered why she was here. She remembered Grandpa Frank's sacrifices, his endless kindness, his stories that shaped her childhood. Money couldn't measure that. Emma squared her shoulders. She gently set the bracelet down, heart pounding, and reached for her wallet. She would find a way, no matter what. The quiet determination in her chest burned brighter than the chandeliers overhead. And just beyond the glass storefront, unseen by everyone, a pair of steady blue eyes watched her with quiet pride. Daniel Carter leaned against the polished railing across the promenade, unseen. A small smile ghosted across his lips as he watched his wife, her courage shining through the marble and judgment and glittering glass. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. He hadn't been sure if she would find him here today, but now he realized she didn't need to. Emma Carter had already found something far more valuable, and the day was only just beginning. The heavy crystal doors of Southern Jade & Company swung gently shut behind a new wave of customers, but Emma barely noticed. Her fingers skimmed over the velvet lining of the display, heart still beating a little faster than normal. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and steadied herself. She wasn't here to compete. She wasn't here to impress. She had a purpose, and no amount of cold shoulders or whispered comments could change that. Josephine's heels clicked briskly against the marble as she returned from showering Chloe and Tessa with attention. Her sharp eyes swept over Emma, pausing briefly on the modest bracelet still cradled in Emma's hand. "Have you made a decision?" Josephine asked, her voice floating down with the weight of expectation. Emma smiled politely. "I'm considering this one. It feels right." Josephine's lips pressed together, a pause so slight it was almost imperceptible, but it rippled in the charged air between them. She leaned in just a fraction closer, her voice sweet but edged like a paper cut. "We do have financing options," she said with a tilt of her head, for pieces that may be out of immediate reach. Emma stiffened. The words were gentle. The insult tucked neatly inside them was not. "I'll manage," Emma said evenly, lifting her chin slightly. She let her gaze drift back to the bracelet. The soft gleam of the jade, the intricate carving. It wasn't grand, but it was full of soul. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught a flicker of movement. Chloe was watching her, a hint of amusement dancing behind her immaculate lashes. Beside her, Tessa Monroe leaned closer, whispering something that made Chloe laugh. A sound light enough to float, but heavy enough to land squarely on Emma's shoulders. Emma's cheeks warmed, but she focused her attention on Ivy, who was patiently waiting behind the counter, her hands folded neatly. "I'd like to buy this one," Emma said, her voice steady even though her stomach tightened. Ivy gave her a small, encouraging nod, but before she could move to assist, Josephine stepped forward with a bright, brittle smile. "Of course," Josephine said, glancing meaningfully at Ivy, who quickly lowered her gaze and stepped back. "Let's make sure everything is in order." Emma pulled out her wallet carefully. She could feel the room's attention shift again, subtle but palpable. It prickled against her skin. As she counted the bills, her mind screamed at her about the savings she was about to spend, but her heart beat louder with the memory of Grandpa Frank's smile, the way his eyes crinkled whenever he spoke about the importance of family. Across the room, Chloe leaned against the counter with lazy grace, pretending to examine a pair of jade earrings. Her voice floated casually through the air, just loud enough to be heard. "Some people really know how to dream big in places like this," she said, smiling at Tessa, who chuckled softly behind her manicured hand. Emma's fingers faltered slightly over her wallet, the edges of the bills slipping against each other. For a breathless second, she considered just walking away, pretending none of this mattered. But then she thought of Grandpa Frank, of everything he had given up so she could have a better life. She wouldn't run. "Will that be cash or card?" Josephine asked, her voice brisk now, the pleasant mask slipping just a little. Emma lifted her head, meeting Josephine's gaze squarely. "Card." Josephine extended her hand, and Emma placed her simple debit card into it, resisting the urge to apologize for it not being platinum or black. As Josephine turned toward the register, Emma exhaled slowly, trying to will the tightness in her chest away. Ivy offered a small, sympathetic smile from the side, but before Emma could relax, a new energy stirred at the store's entrance. The doors opened with a soft chime, and the atmosphere shifted. Subtly at first, but undeniable. Heads turned. Chloe straightened instinctively. Tessa tucked a glossy strand of hair behind her ear. Even Josephine hesitated for a heartbeat before glancing over her shoulder. Emma followed their gaze, her heart giving a strange little skip. A man stepped inside, framed briefly by the bright sun outside before the doors swung shut behind him. He was tall, dressed in an effortlessly tailored suit the color of storm clouds, the top button of his crisp shirt undone. His presence was quiet, not flashy, but commanding in a way that seemed to settle the air around him. Daniel. Emma's breath caught, a strange thrill rippling through her chest. He hadn't told her he'd be here. She hadn't expected it. He moved through the boutique slowly, his hands tucked casually into his pockets, his sharp eyes scanning the displays with an expression that was neither hurried nor impressed, but quietly discerning. Chloe was already adjusting her stance, her smile blooming a little too brightly. "Excuse me," she called lightly, taking a step forward. "Could you help me with something?" Daniel's eyes flicked toward her briefly, politely, before returning to the rows of jade artifacts as if she hadn't spoken at all. The brush-off was so subtle, so clean, that Chloe faltered mid-stride, her hand hovering awkwardly in the air before she let it fall. Josephine, sensing something important, hurried over, her heels striking the floor in an urgent staccato. "Welcome to Southern Jade and Company," she said, her voice syrupy smooth. "Are you looking for something special today?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He let his gaze sweep the room again, pausing briefly, deliberately, when his eyes found Emma standing quietly by the payment counter, her wallet still open in her hand. For a moment the noise of the store seemed to dim. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. She felt rooted to the spot, her emotions churning faster than she could process. Daniel smiled. Slow. Genuine. The kind of smile that only Emma ever saw. The kind of smile that said, "I see you." Josephine followed his gaze, and for the first time, a flicker of confusion crossed her perfectly made-up face. "I'm here for her," Daniel said, his voice low, steady, and unmistakably clear. The words floated through the boutique like a bell's chime, soft, but impossible to ignore. Emma's world tilted, the entire store seeming to fall away in that moment. And somewhere in the corner, Chloe Fairfax's smile faltered, ever so slightly. Tension crackled through the boutique, hanging heavy in the air like the thick summer humidity just before a thunderstorm. And deep inside, Emma understood. This day was about to change everything. Emma's breath caught in her chest, a silent gasp she didn't dare let out. She gripped her wallet a little tighter, the edges of the leather digging into her palms. Daniel stood there so calm, so certain, as if he belonged in the middle of Southern Jade and Company, as if he wasn't the most unexpected thing to walk through that door. Josephine blinked, her professional mask slipping for a fraction of a second. Then she recovered, smoothing her skirt with a practiced hand. She offered Daniel a bright, if slightly strained, smile. "Oh," she said, voice lightly tripping over itself. "You're with her?" Daniel's eyes didn't move from Emma's face. His voice, low and even, made the small polished store feel suddenly too small, too quiet. "Yes," he said simply. "I am." Around them the boutique buzz softened, a collective pause falling over the customers and staff. Chloe and Tessa exchanged quick glances, something uncomfortable flickering across their perfectly made-up faces. Emma swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe. She wasn't sure what startled her more, the quiet authority in Daniel's tone or the way the entire room seemed to pivot because of it. Josephine recovered quickly, her smile widening into something that was almost convincing. "Well, of course," she said, voice sweet but too quick. "We're so pleased to have you both. Let me personally assist you with your selection." Emma opened her mouth to protest, but Daniel spoke first, his voice cutting through the thick, perfumed air. "No need. She's already chosen." There was a finality in his tone that made Josephine hesitate. Her hands, smooth and manicured, fluttered once at her sides before she clasped them neatly in front of her. "I see," she said. She turned back to Emma, her eyes cool again, calculating. "Then we can proceed with the payment, if you're ready." Emma nodded stiffly, sliding her card across the counter toward Ivy, who stepped forward hesitantly. Josephine started to interject, but Daniel gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Josephine faltered, her mouth tightening, but she said nothing more. Ivy's hands shook just a little as she processed the payment, and Emma wished she could reassure her. But right now, every nerve in her body was tangled in knots. The receipt printed with an abrupt whir. Ivy handed it over carefully, along with a small polished box wrapped in cream paper and tied with a sage green ribbon. "Thank you for your purchase, ma'am," Ivy said quietly, her eyes soft with something like admiration. Emma took the box with both hands, feeling its weight settle into her palms, not heavy but important. Behind her, Chloe's voice rose again, falsely sweet. "Oh, how lovely," she said, her tone dripping with insincerity. "It's always nice to see simple tastes celebrated." Tessa let out a soft laugh, quickly masked behind her hand. Emma stiffened. She turned, ready to say something, anything, to stand her ground. But before she could speak, Daniel's voice cut through the moment, calm and razor-sharp. "I wasn't aware Southern Jade allowed customers to critique others' choices," he said, his gaze resting lightly, pointedly on Chloe. Chloe flushed, her smile freezing on her lips. Tessa shifted uncomfortably beside her. Josephine's face paled slightly. She stepped forward, smoothing things over with a brittle laugh. "We certainly pride ourselves on being a welcoming environment for all guests," she said quickly. "Of course, we apologize for any misunderstandings." Daniel raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. His silence pressed heavier than any words could have. Emma tightened her grip on the box and turned toward the door, heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She needed air. She needed space. She needed... "Emma." Daniel's voice again, quieter now, almost gentle. She hesitated, feeling the weight of a dozen eyes on her back. She turned slowly, forcing herself to meet his gaze. He stepped closer, the space between them narrowing until it felt like nothing at all. "You forgot this," he said, holding out a small, folded card. Confused, Emma took it, fingers brushing his. Her skin tingled from the brief touch. She opened the card. Inside, in Daniel's familiar, careful handwriting, were 3 simple words. "You're priceless too." Her throat tightened, sudden and sharp. She blinked hard, willing the sting in her eyes to go away. Without thinking, without caring who saw, she looked up at him and smiled. A real, unguarded smile that felt like the first breath after being underwater too long. Daniel smiled back, something deep and warm flickering in his eyes. Behind them, the boutique faded away. The sparkling jade, the polished marble, the disapproving stares. None of it mattered anymore. For the first time that morning, Emma felt seen. Not judged, not measured. Just seen. She slipped the note into her pocket and took Daniel's offered hand. Together they walked out of Southern Jade and Company, leaving the heavy silence and wide, curious eyes behind them. Outside, the Charleston sun bathed them in its gentle warmth, and for a moment everything else faded away. Emma squeezed Daniel's hand, holding on to the steady reassurance of his presence. Neither of them spoke. They didn't have to. Every step they took together echoed a simple truth she had almost forgotten in the glittering, judgmental halls of luxury. The greatest treasures aren't worn or displayed. They are chosen, held close, protected fiercely. And sometimes they walk beside you into the sunlight, smiling like you're the only thing that ever mattered. The warm Charleston air wrapped around them like a soft blanket as Emma and Daniel stepped away from the glass storefront. The polished perfection of Southern Jade and Company shrank behind them, and with each step, the tension that had knotted inside Emma's chest began to loosen, thread by thread, but not entirely. She stole a glance at Daniel, walking steadily beside her, his hand still loosely intertwined with hers. There was something in his eyes, not anger exactly, but a watchful stillness, a kind of restraint she knew too well. Daniel wasn't a man who wore his emotions loudly. When he cared in ways so deep, so fierce, that sometimes it frightened her how quietly he carried it all. Emma cleared her throat, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't have to do that." Daniel slowed his pace, turning to face her. His brows lifted slightly, as if the thought genuinely surprised him. "I didn't have to?" His voice was gentle but firm. "Emma, you should never have been treated like that. Not by anyone." She looked down, focusing on the cracks in the cobblestones beneath her feet. The box holding the jade bracelet felt heavier in her hands now, like it contained more than just polished stone, like it held every ounce of pride she had swallowed inside that boutique. "I'm used to it," she said quietly. "People see what they want to see." Daniel exhaled slowly, the sound filled with something like sadness. He reached out, tilting her chin up with the lightest touch so she would meet his eyes. "I see you," he said, his voice low, steady. "Not the shoes you wear, not the jacket. You—" Emma blinked fast, the world blurring for a moment. She pressed her lips together to steady herself, to keep from unraveling in the middle of the sun-dappled promenade. "You're not supposed to be here," she said after a moment, a soft laugh slipping through the knot in her chest. "You were working." Daniel smiled, the corners of his mouth lifting in that slow, private way that always made her heart stumble. "I was, until Ivy called me." Emma's eyebrows pulled together. "Ivy?" "She recognized you," he said. "Figured out who you were when Josephine started handling things poorly. Ivy knows my connection to the store." Emma's heart gave a strange little skip. "She called you?" Daniel nodded. "Told me you were here. Told me you might need someone on your side." Emma clutched the box a little tighter to her chest. Ivy's quiet kindness hadn't just been about showing her a bracelet. It had been a silent lifeline, thrown without fanfare, in the middle of a storm Emma hadn't realized was swallowing her. "I didn't want to embarrass you," Emma said, voice trembling despite herself. "I just wanted to find something meaningful. I didn't care if it wasn't the fanciest." Daniel's expression softened, a look so full of love it nearly undid her. "You could never embarrass me," he said quietly. "You're the reason any of this means anything at all." Emma opened her mouth, but no words came, only the warm sting of emotion rising faster than she could contain. Daniel glanced over her shoulder, his expression darkening just slightly. Emma turned to see Chloe and Tessa lingering near the entrance of Southern Jade and Company, their heads bent together in whispered conversation. Occasionally, Chloe's sharp gaze flicked toward them, curiosity and something sharper glinting in her eyes. Emma stiffened instinctively, feeling the old weight of judgment settle back on her shoulders. Daniel's hand brushed hers again, grounding her. "Let them look," he murmured, his voice a quiet shield between them. "They don't see you, Emma. Not really. They only see what they want to." Emma breathed in, steadying herself. She knew he was right. She had spent too much of her life shrinking under glances like that, letting them shape her, diminish her. No more. She lifted her chin and met Chloe's gaze head on. There was no anger in her expression, no defiance. Just a calm certainty that needed no explanation, no apology. Chloe looked away first. Emma turned back to Daniel, finding his hand still extended toward her, palm up, waiting. "You ready to go?" he asked, a small smile tugging at his mouth. "Where?" Emma asked, the tension easing from her shoulders at the warmth in his voice. "You'll see," Daniel said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. He closed his fingers around hers, leading her away from the boutique, away from the polished perfection that had tried so hard to convince her she didn't belong. They walked down the cobblestone paths, past wrought iron gates draped in ivy, past antique lampposts and whispering palmetto trees. The city buzzed softly around them. Distant conversations, the hum of carriages on the side streets, the faint salty scent of the nearby harbor. Finally, they turned down a quieter lane where the buildings were older, their bricks worn soft by centuries of salt and rain and sun. Emma frowned in confusion as Daniel stopped in front of a modest storefront tucked between two larger, flashier shops. The window was filled with small, beautiful pieces, handmade pottery, delicate watercolor paintings, vintage jewelry arranged on velvet stands. The sign above the door read simply, "The Gilded Lily." Daniel pushed open the door, the brass bell chiming softly, and held it open for her. Emma hesitated for half a second before stepping inside. The space was warm, filled with the scent of old books and lavender, and the quiet hum of soft jazz playing somewhere in the back. An older woman looked up from behind the counter, her eyes bright and welcoming. "Daniel?" she called out, her voice lilting with fondness. "Been a while?" He smiled warmly. "Hey, Lily. Thought it was time to introduce someone important." Emma's heart thudded painfully in her chest. Lily's eyes twinkled as she looked at Emma. "You must be the one he's been bragging about." Emma flushed, glancing shyly at Daniel, who only smiled broader. "Come on," Daniel said, tugging her gently toward the back. "There's something I want you to see." They wove between the shelves until they reached a small glass case tucked into a corner. Inside, resting on deep blue velvet, was a necklace, a single piece of deep green jade carved into a perfect, delicate heart. Not flashy, not expensive, just breathtaking in its simplicity. Emma stared at it, her throat tightening. Daniel's voice was soft in her ear. "When I first started investing, before any of the big deals, before any of the success, Lily's shop was the first place I ever bought something real, something that mattered." Emma blinked fast, the story sinking into her bones. "I thought about you when I saw this last week," he continued. "Knew it wasn't about price or prestige. It's about meaning." He turned toward her, his eyes searching hers. "I know today wasn't easy," he said. "But I hope you remember, you're not alone. Not now, not ever." Emma's fingers trembled as she reached out, her hand hovering over the glass, not daring to touch. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't try to blink them away. Instead, she smiled. Wide, true. And for the first time all day, the world felt absolutely, breathtakingly perfect. Emma stood in front of the glass case, her breath misting faintly against the surface as she leaned closer. The carved jade heart inside seemed to pulse with its own quiet energy, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Daniel didn't rush her. He simply stood at her side, silent, steady. A lighthouse when the rest of the world threatened to sweep her away. She looked up at him finally, her voice trembling with emotion she didn't bother hiding anymore. "It's beautiful. It's you," Daniel said simply. Emma laughed, a soft, broken sound, pressing her fingers to her mouth. For a moment, she didn't trust herself to say anything else. Behind them, Lily moved quietly, giving them space. The shop felt like a safe pocket of the world, a place untouched by judgment, wealth, or competition. Just old wood floors, warm lamplight, and the scent of lavender curling in the air. Emma reached into her purse, fumbling for her wallet, but Daniel gently caught her hand. "No," he said, his voice low. "This one's from me." She started to protest, shaking her head. "Daniel, you don't have to—" "I want to," he interrupted, voice soft but firm. "Not because you need it, not because you couldn't buy it yourself, but because sometimes—" He hesitated, his thumb brushing against the back of her hand. "Sometimes a gift should be a reminder of what you're worth." Emma's throat closed tight. She could only nod. Lily smiled warmly from behind the counter, wrapping the necklace in careful, loving movements. "I'll make sure it's perfect for her," she said with a wink at Daniel. As Emma watched the delicate blue box being tied with a white ribbon, her mind drifted unbidden back to Southern Jade and Company, to the polished marble floors, to Josephine's strained smiles, to Chloe's whispered mockery, to the way Emma's palms had sweated as she counted out every hard-earned dollar, wondering if it would be enough. And then, to Daniel, The way he had stood beside her without needing to raise his voice, without needing to prove anything. He had simply chosen her, publicly, quietly, fully. Emma's heart squeezed in her chest. It wasn't about the jade. It never had been. It was about being seen, and still being chosen. Lily placed the box gently into Daniel's hands. He turned and offered it to Emma without flourish, just a simple gesture heavy with meaning. She took it with trembling fingers, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Daniel only smiled, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Let's get out of here," he said softly. "I'm starving and you owe me a slice of peach pie." Emma laughed, the sound lighter now, genuine. "You're the one who said you were taking me out." "I am." Daniel's grin widened. "But pie first, then something even better." They left the gilded lily hand in hand, stepping back into the golden afternoon. The sun had started its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the cobbled streets with long, soft shadows. As they walked, Emma felt a new warmth settle inside her, a slow, steady certainty that had nothing to do with money or appearances. It was the certainty of belonging. They wound through the quieter streets of Charleston, past the sweetgrass basket stands, past the old iron gates dripping with wisteria. Daniel led her to a small cafe tucked between two historic buildings, the scent of cinnamon and butter curling invitingly into the street. The waitress seated them on the patio, the view overlooking a sleepy garden square. Spanish moss hung from the trees like nature's lace, and somewhere nearby, a fountain gurgled softly. Daniel ordered 2 slices of homemade peach pie and coffee, his voice easy, relaxed. Emma watched him, marveling again at the way he made spaces feel safer just by being in them. When the pie arrived, golden and fragrant, Emma couldn't hold back a sigh of happiness. She took a bite, and for a moment the world dissolved into nothing but buttery crust and sweet, warm peaches. "You're quiet," Daniel said after a few minutes, his tone teasing but gentle. "Dangerous for you." Emma laughed around her fork. "I'm just thinking." He leaned back in his chair, cradling his coffee mug between his hands. "Good thoughts?" She set down her fork and met his gaze across the table. "The best." Daniel's smile softened. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing lightly over hers. "I know today was hard," he said, "but I hope you know I'm proud of you." Emma blinked fast against the sudden sting behind her eyes. "I didn't feel very strong." "You were," he said, no hesitation. "You are. It takes strength to stay kind in a world that keeps trying to make you prove yourself." Emma looked down at their hands, her thumb tracing a small circle over his knuckles. "I hate how they looked at me," she admitted, voice barely a whisper, "like I didn't belong." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "They were wrong." She nodded, her heart aching but lighter now. "I know." They sat there for a long moment, the sounds of the square around them fading into a comfortable hum. Finally, Daniel pulled something from his pocket, a small folded paper she recognized immediately. The note he'd given her at the boutique. "You're priceless, too." Emma smiled, the kind that started deep in her chest and radiated outward. Daniel unfolded the paper and placed it between them on the table. "Keep it," he said. "Not because you need reminding, but because sometimes—" He paused, looking at her with that steady, unwavering gaze. "Sometimes the world needs to be reminded who they're underestimating." Emma let out a soft, trembling laugh, blinking back tears she no longer tried to hide. She reached out and covered the paper with her hand, pressing it firmly against the worn wood of the table. "I love you," she said. Daniel's smile deepened, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Good. Because I'm planning to spend a lot more afternoons buying you pie and telling you just how much you matter." Emma laughed again, bright and full, as Daniel lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it softly, right there in the late afternoon sun. And for the first time in a long while, Emma believed it. Every word, every look, every promise hidden in the spaces between them. She was seen. She was chosen. And she was finally exactly where she belonged. The evening breeze brushed against Emma's skin as she and Daniel stepped out of the cafe. The sun had dipped low, painting the sky in hues of gold and soft rose. The world around them seemed quieter now, as if Charleston itself had slowed to listen to the steady rhythm of their footsteps on the cobblestones. Daniel's hand brushed against hers before he laced their fingers together, grounding her in that simple, unspoken way he always did. Emma squeezed his hand back, a silent thank you for more than just the pie and coffee. For everything. They strolled past wrought iron gates wrapped in vines, their shadows stretching long across the sidewalks. For a few moments neither of them spoke, content in the comfortable silence. But Emma could feel it stirring. A question, heavy and patient, waiting for the right moment. Finally, she glanced up at him, her voice soft. "You didn't have to come today." Daniel slowed his steps, turning to look at her fully. His dark eyes caught the last golden rays of the sun, making them burn like embers. "I did," he said. "There was never a choice." Emma's throat tightened. She hated how easily doubt could slip into her chest, how it tried to twist moments like this into something smaller, something uncertain. She turned her face away slightly, watching the lamplights begin to flicker to life along the street. "I don't belong in places like that, Daniel." His hand tugged gently, pulling her back so she had to face him again. His voice, when he spoke, was low but fierce with emotion. "You belong anywhere you choose to stand, Emma Carter. Don't ever let a glass door or a marble floor convince you otherwise." Her heart twisted painfully at the conviction in his words. "I'm not like them," she whispered, the vulnerability slicing sharper than she intended. "I don't come from old money or polished manners. I'll never fit in their world." Daniel's gaze softened. He stepped closer until there was barely any space between them, the air charged and humming. "I didn't marry you to fit into anyone's world," he said. "I married you because you are my world." Emma's breath caught, the force of his words slamming straight into the hollow spaces she hadn't even realized were still aching. She searched his face, looking for cracks, looking for doubt. But there was none. Only certainty. Only love. A light breeze stirred the loose tendrils of her hair, brushing them across her cheek. Daniel reached up and tucked them gently behind her ear, his touch so tender it almost unraveled her. "I mean it, Emma," he murmured. "You're the strongest person I know. And if anyone can't see that—" His mouth curved into a wry smile. "That's their loss." Emma laughed quietly, the sound trembling but real. She leaned her forehead against his chest, letting herself be held, letting herself believe. They stood there, wrapped in the fading light, while Charleston carried on around them. Distant laughter from a rooftop bar, the clink of glasses from an open window, the low rumble of a horse-drawn carriage rattling down another street. Finally, Emma pulled back, her voice steadier now. "Thank you for today, for showing up when I didn't even know I needed you." Daniel's smile turned a little mischievous. "You'll find I have a talent for that." Emma grinned, swatting lightly at his arm. "Don't get smug about it." "Too late," he said, laughter dancing in his voice. They wandered further, eventually finding themselves near the Battery, where the harbor breeze was stronger, carrying the scent of salt and faraway places. Gas lamps flickered to life, casting long pools of light across the promenade. Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen, his expression tightening just slightly before he slipped it away again. Emma caught the shift immediately. "Work?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "There's a shareholders' dinner tomorrow, some pretty big players. They're expecting me." Emma bit her lip. "Is it important?" Daniel shrugged one shoulder, but there was a tension in the set of his jaw. "Important enough." She studied him, the way he carried success like an invisible weight across his broad shoulders. How easily people assumed it was effortless for him. They didn't see the nights he worked until dawn, the negotiations he fought through, the sacrifices he never mentioned. "You're still going, right?" she asked gently. He looked at her, something raw and uncertain flickering across his face, a crack in his armor few ever saw. "I was," he said slowly, "until today." Emma frowned. "Daniel, you can't miss something important because of me, because of today." He cupped her cheek with one hand, his thumb brushing across her skin. "You're what's important." The words hit her like a warm tide, but still a knot of guilt twisted in her stomach. "You've worked too hard for this," she said. "Don't throw it away." Daniel smiled faintly. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing where I'm needed most." Emma shook her head, smiling through the sheen of tears gathering in her eyes. "You're impossible." He leaned down, brushing his forehead lightly against hers. "That's why you married me." She laughed, the sound bubbling up, rich and full. She rested her hands against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. "Go to the dinner," she said softly. "You deserve it. Just promise me one thing." "Anything," Daniel said immediately. Emma looked up at him, her voice trembling with the weight of all the love she felt. "Promise me you'll never doubt how proud I am of you." Daniel's throat moved in a hard swallow. His hands tightened around hers. "I promise," he said, voice rough with emotion. They stood there, the city humming quietly around them. Two souls stitched together by promises made and kept. And as the first stars pricked through the velvet dusk above them, Emma realized something she hadn't quite understood before. It wasn't about belonging to a world she didn't recognize. It was about building a world with someone who would never ask her to change. And that, she thought as Daniel pressed a kiss to her forehead, was a kind of wealth no store, no socialite, no amount of polished marble could ever match. The morning air in Charleston was thick with the scent of jasmine and salt as Emma stepped onto the wraparound porch, a cup of coffee cradled between her palms. She leaned against the white railing, watching the sleepy town wake up under the soft pink glow of the rising sun. Inside, she could hear Daniel moving around the kitchen, humming low under his breath. Some old tune she didn't recognize, but that somehow felt familiar anyway. The memory of the night before flickered in her mind. The way he had promised, without hesitation, that she mattered more than any glittering room full of shareholders. She smiled to herself, a quiet, private smile, feeling that certainty settle deeper in her chest. But even as she sipped her coffee, even as the warmth filled her hands and belly, she knew today wouldn't pass without trouble. There was always fallout when you didn't play by the invisible rules of high society, and yesterday they had broken more than a few. The screen door creaked behind her. Daniel stepped out, holding two plates balanced expertly in one hand, pancakes and strawberries. He set one down in front of her with a boyish grin. "Best cure for a bruised ego," he said, handing her a fork, "sugar and carbs." Emma laughed softly, but the knot in her stomach stayed tight. She twirled her fork idly through the strawberries, appetite suddenly absent. Daniel noticed immediately. His grin faded, replaced with a quiet concern. "What's on your mind?" he asked, easing into the chair beside her. Emma hesitated, then set her fork down carefully. "It's not over, is it?" Daniel didn't pretend not to understand. He leaned back, stretching his long legs out across the porch, his coffee cup resting on his thigh. "No," he said simply. "It's not." Emma sighed, pressing her hands to her forehead for a moment. "I didn't want to start a war, Daniel. I just wanted a bracelet." "You didn't start anything," he said, his voice steady. "You just refused to be less than you are. Some people don't know how to handle that." Emma looked out at the quiet street, where the first few cars were beginning to roll by, the sleepy buzz of the town rising with the sun. "Do you think they'll make it difficult?" she asked quietly. Daniel was silent for a long beat. Then he set his coffee cup down with a soft clink and turned to face her fully. "They already are," he said. "I got an email this morning, from Josephine." Emma's stomach dropped. "What did it say?" Daniel's mouth tightened. "An apology, very formal, very carefully worded." He paused, studying her. "And a warning." Emma's breath caught. "Warning?" He nodded. "There's a board meeting scheduled. They're reviewing the ownership structure of Southern Jade and Company. Some of the old shareholders aren't happy about appearances being disrupted." Emma's chest tightened painfully. She knew what that meant, not in so many words, but in the language of polite exclusion, of doors closed quietly in the face of those deemed unworthy. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to—" Daniel cut her off gently, reaching for her hand and weaving his fingers through hers. "Stop," he said firmly. "This isn't your fault. This was always going to happen. The minute I stopped playing by their rules, they were going to come for me. You just gave me a reason not to care anymore." Emma blinked back the sting of tears. "But your work—" "My work," Daniel said, his voice soft but unshakable, "is building something better, not clinging to something broken." A lump formed in her throat so sharp it hurt to swallow. Daniel squeezed her hand, grounding her. "If they want to fight," he said, a faint smile playing at his mouth, "they're going to find out I don't break easy." Emma laughed wetly, shaking her head. "You're impossible." "I've been called worse," he teased, lifting her hand to his lips and brushing a soft kiss across her knuckles. For a moment, they sat there in the rising sun, the quiet world spinning slowly around them. And then the phone on the porch table buzzed sharply, shattering the stillness. Daniel didn't move immediately. His eyes stayed locked on hers for a moment longer, as if memorizing something important. Then, finally, he picked up the phone and glanced at the screen. A low breath escaped him. "It's Harrison Green." Emma recognized the name instantly, the regional director for Southern Jade and Company, the man who had quietly witnessed everything unfold at the boutique, who had seen with his own eyes how Emma had been treated. Daniel answered the call with a clipped, professional greeting. Emma watched his face carefully, saw the slight narrowing of his eyes, the careful stillness of his body. "Yes," Daniel said. "I understand." He paused, listening, the muscles in his jaw tightening just slightly. "No, that won't be a problem." Another pause. "Thank you, Harrison. I'll handle it." He ended the call and set the phone down carefully, his expression unreadable. Emma leaned forward, heart hammering. What did he say? Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "They're moving the board meeting up," he said, "to tomorrow." Emma swallowed hard. "That soon?" He nodded. "They want to resolve the ownership concerns before it makes more waves." Emma's mind raced. Tomorrow, so soon. She reached out, covering Daniel's hand with both of hers. "You don't have to do this alone." Daniel's smile was small but full of something fierce and bright. "I know," he said simply. They sat there for a long time, the pancakes cooling on the plates beside them, the coffee growing cold in their cups. But neither of them moved. The storm was coming. They could both feel it. But for the first time, Emma realized she wasn't afraid. Because whatever came next, they would face it together. The morning of the board meeting arrived thick with humidity, the Charleston air heavy and unmoving. Emma stood at the window of their bedroom, staring out over the garden, the hydrangeas drooping slightly under the oppressive weight of the day. Behind her, she could hear Daniel getting dressed, the soft rustle of fabric, the clink of cufflinks being fastened. Every sound seemed sharper than usual, every second dragging out longer than it should. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, grounding herself. "You don't have to come," Daniel said behind her, his voice low, careful. Emma turned, her heart twisting at the sight of him. He wore a dark navy suit, simple but immaculate, the clean lines making him look like he could walk into a battlefield and win it without ever raising his voice. "I want to," she said. "I need to." Daniel hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded once, slipping his watch onto his wrist. Emma moved to him, her hands reaching instinctively for the small, familiar adjustments, smoothing his collar, straightening the slight tilt of his tie. She didn't say anything. She just needed to touch him, to remind herself that they were still solid, still together. When she looked up, Daniel caught her hand in his. "You're my anchor today," he said softly. "Don't let go." Emma squeezed his fingers. "Never." The ride to the board meeting was quiet. Tension sat heavily between them, not from fear, but from the certainty that the ground beneath them was about to shift. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Daniel's hand never left hers during the entire drive. They arrived at a tall, historic building downtown, its stone facade worn smooth by time and tradition. Inside, the conference room was all dark wood and leather chairs, the windows overlooking the sleepy harbor beyond. Already seated around the polished mahogany table were the board members, men and women, most older, their expressions carved into polite, unreadable masks. Emma felt the shift in the air the moment she stepped into the room behind Daniel. Some eyes flicked to her briefly, assessing. Some didn't bother hiding their disapproval. Daniel squeezed her hand once before releasing it, guiding her gently to a seat near the back wall. She wasn't officially part of the meeting, but she was allowed to observe. Witness. She sat down, folding her hands tightly in her lap, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Harrison Green stood at the head of the table, clearing his throat. "Let's begin." The next hour blurred together in a haze of formalities, legal language, and polished accusations wrapped neatly in professional tones. At the heart of it, though, the message was clear. Some shareholders believed Daniel's personal choices, meaning his defense of Emma and his refusal to publicly separate personal loyalty from business interest, reflected poorly on the prestige of Southern Jade & Co. Words like brand integrity and client expectations were tossed around carefully, like knives wrapped in velvet. Emma sat very still, forcing herself to breathe evenly, even as her stomach twisted painfully. She watched Daniel as he listened, his face an unreadable mask of calm. Only the slight flex of his jaw muscle gave him away. When it was finally his turn to speak, Daniel rose slowly, smoothing his jacket with a deliberate hand. He didn't look at notes. He didn't fumble. His voice, when he spoke, filled the room with quiet authority. "I understand your concerns," he said. "I respect the tradition and reputation Southern Jade & Company has built over the decades." He paused, letting his words settle, letting the board lean in just slightly. "But tradition without heart," he continued, his gaze sweeping the room, "becomes hollow." A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. "My wife," Daniel said, his voice steady and clear, was treated with condescension, judgment, and exclusion in one of our flagship stores. Not because of who she is, but because of who others assumed she wasn't. Emma's throat tightened painfully. Daniel's gaze locked onto one of the older board members who had been the most vocal about image concerns. "If that is the image we are defending," Daniel said, his tone sharpening just slightly, "then we have bigger problems than a single public relations incident." Silence pressed against the windows, thick and tangible. "I invested in Southern Jade and Company," Daniel continued, "because I believed in its craftsmanship, its heritage, its integrity." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. "And integrity," he said, "doesn't bow to wealth. It doesn't dress in designer labels. It doesn't care how loud a person's laugh is at a charity gala." He straightened, letting the words settle. "It cares about people, about meaning, about sincerity." The board shifted uncomfortably. Several avoided his gaze entirely. Daniel's next words were softer, but they struck harder than any shouted argument. "I will not apologize for expecting this company to live up to the values it claims to represent. And I will not disown the person who reminds me every single day what those values look like." Emma blinked fast, a tear slipping free despite her best efforts. Across the room, Harrison Green cleared his throat again, breaking the heavy silence. "We will deliberate," he said carefully, "and we will consider all factors, including the integrity you speak of." Daniel nodded once, sharp and final. Without another word, he turned, crossing the room in 3 measured strides to where Emma sat frozen in her chair. He held out his hand. Emma didn't hesitate. She rose, slipping her fingers into his, the room blurring around her as they walked out together, past the stiff faces, past the disapproving glances, past the heavy locked doors of old money and older prejudice, out into the sharp, salt-sweet air of Charleston once more. They said nothing at first. The only sound was the slap of their shoes against the ancient brick streets. Finally, Emma let out a long, shuddering breath, her voice breaking the silence. "You were incredible." Daniel squeezed her hand. "You were brave." Emma shook her head, emotion tightening her throat. "I didn't even say anything." "You didn't have to," he said softly. "You stayed." And somehow, in a world built on appearances and power and polished lies, that truth mattered more than any victory ever could. The streets of Charleston buzzed softly around them, the muted clatter of midday life weaving between the ancient oak trees and stately brick buildings. Emma and Daniel moved through it like a current against the tide, hand in hand, neither speaking, both lost in the enormity of what had just happened. The boardroom felt like a distant storm cloud now, still heavy on the horizon, but for the moment, they were out from under its shadow. They turned down a quiet side street, away from the busier roads, their steps slowing as they approached a shaded square. An old stone fountain burbled at its center, the water glinting under shafts of golden sunlight breaking through the trees. Daniel led Emma to a worn wooden bench facing the fountain. He sat first, pulling her gently down beside him, his hand never letting go of hers. For a long moment they just sat there, breathing. "I think I forgot how to," Emma said finally, half laughing, half sighing as she pressed her free hand against her chest. "Breathe, I mean." Daniel smiled faintly, the lines around his eyes deepening with something that looked like pride and weariness all at once. "You held it together," he said. "Better than most people would have." Emma leaned her head against his shoulder, closing her eyes. "I didn't feel like it." "You didn't have to feel it," Daniel murmured. "You just had to be there. And you were." The words sank into her, slow and healing. She thought of how many times she had tried to make herself small in rooms like that. How many times she had bent her head, smoothed her rough edges, apologized for breathing too loudly, for not fitting the mold. Today, she hadn't shrunk. Today, she had stayed. Emma lifted her head, studying Daniel's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful crease between his brows. He looked tired, but steady. Steadier than she felt. "You know they're not just going to let this go," she said quietly. "Even if you made your case." Daniel tilted his head, giving her a sidelong glance. "I'm counting on it." Emma frowned slightly. "You want them to fight you?" "I want them to show who they really are," he said simply. "So when the time comes to choose, it's obvious what side we're standing on." Emma leaned back, digesting that. It wasn't about winning one meeting. It was about something bigger, something slower and harder, a war of values, not just appearances. A soft breeze stirred the trees overhead. Somewhere nearby, a church bell began to toll the hour. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, smoothing it open on his lap. Emma leaned over to look. It was a simple document. No official letterhead, no legal jargon, just a short handwritten note, a proposal for independent ownership. Emma stared at it, blinking. "You're leaving Southern Jade?" Daniel's mouth twitched into a small, almost smile. "Not leaving. Rebuilding." Her heart twisted sharply. "You're serious?" "I'm done trying to fix something that doesn't want to be fixed," he said, his voice low, certain. "It's time to build something that actually means something." Emma pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed. "But Daniel, that's huge. That's everything you've worked for." He turned to face her fully, his dark eyes steady. "No, Emma. Everything I've worked for is sitting right here beside me." Tears pricked the corners of her eyes before she could stop them. Daniel lifted a hand, brushing his knuckles gently along her jaw. "I want to create a place where people like you, like us, belong without having to prove anything. A place built on real worth, not appearances." Emma let out a shaky breath, her heart full and breaking all at once. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll help me," he said. "Say you'll be part of it." Emma laughed, a wet, incredulous sound. "You're asking me to help you start a jewelry empire?" "I'm asking you," Daniel said, "to help me build something honest, something real." She stared at him, at the man who had stood up in a room full of powerful people and chosen her, without hesitation. How could she say anything but yes? Emma reached out, closing her hand firmly around his. "I'm in," she said, voice shaking but sure. Daniel smiled, the kind of smile that lit from somewhere deep inside. "Good," he said softly, "because I already bought the building." Emma's mouth dropped open. "You what?" He chuckled, the sound low and rich, and pulled a set of keys from his other pocket, dangling them in front of her. "Small place off King Street," he said. "Needs work, but it's ours." Emma covered her mouth with both hands, laughter bubbling out between her fingers, disbelief and joy mixing together in a heady rush. "You're insane," she said through her laughter. "I prefer visionary," Daniel said, grinning. She launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck, holding him tightly enough to steal his breath. He didn't mind. He just held her back, both of them clinging to the promise of something new, something better. Something they would build, piece by piece, with their own hands and hearts. For the first time in a long, long time, Emma didn't feel like she was standing on someone else's front porch, waiting to be let inside. She was home. And together, they were about to open a door no one could ever close on them again. The new building stood quietly at the corner of King Street, its red brick facade weathered but dignified, like an old soul waiting to be remembered. Ivy clung to the sides in wild, tangled vines, softening the sharp edges with bursts of green. Emma stood on the sidewalk, the late afternoon light casting long shadows behind her, the set of keys Daniel had given her pressing into her palm. He watched her silently, giving her space, his hands tucked casually into his pockets. "Well," Emma said, tilting her head, "it has potential." Daniel's laughter rumbled low in his chest. Translation: "It's a wreck." She turned to him, one brow arched. "I was being polite." He stepped closer, the warmth of his presence a steady comfort. "We don't need polished floors and chandeliers to make something beautiful." Emma turned her gaze back to the building, her heart thudding with something between excitement and terror. She could almost see it now: clean windows, fresh paint, the storefront filled with light and hope. But also, the enormity of it, the weight of starting over, of building from nothing. "What if it's too much?" she asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he slipped the keys gently from her hand, walked to the heavy front door, and pushed it open with a low creak. He turned, holding the door for her, his expression easy, steady. "One step at a time," he said, "like everything else worth doing." Emma drew in a slow breath and crossed the threshold. Inside, the space smelled of dust and old wood. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and the back wall was partially stripped to bare brick. But sunlight flooded through tall windows, catching the floating motes in a soft golden haze. She could almost hear it, the soft chime of a doorbell as customers entered, the quiet hum of conversations, the clink of delicate jade bracelets being set on velvet trays. Daniel closed the door behind them, the heavy latch clicking into place. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice breaking the stillness. Emma smiled, a slow, blooming thing that spread through her chest. "I'm thinking," she said, "this could be the start of something better than anything we left behind." Daniel moved closer, his fingers brushing lightly against hers. "Exactly what I was hoping you'd say." They spent the next hour wandering the space, Daniel pulling out a battered notepad to jot down ideas as Emma moved from room to room, letting her imagination spin. "We could keep the original brick exposed here," she said, running her hand across the rough surface. "It feels real." "Solid," Daniel scribbled a note. "Real and solid, got it." She laughed, the sound light and unguarded, bouncing off the empty walls. They reached a small alcove near the front window, where the late afternoon sun spilled across the floor like melted gold. "This," Emma said, her voice soft with wonder. "This should be the heart of it." Daniel glanced around. "The main showcase?" She shook her head. "Number not just for the expensive pieces, for the ones with stories. The ones people will walk in and connect with, not because of the price tag, but because they see something of themselves in it." Daniel's eyes softened. "A story corner." Emma nodded. "Exactly." He wrote it down carefully, as if it were a blueprint for something sacred. As the light outside shifted toward evening, they stood in the middle of the empty room, the bones of their future stretching out around them. Emma turned toward him, nerves fluttering again. "Are you really ready for this? Walking away from Southern Jade? From everything you built there?" Daniel slipped his hands into his pockets, his gaze steady and sure. "What I built there," he said, "was supposed to be about meaning, about craftsmanship. But somewhere along the way it became about appearances, about playing a part. That's not why I started." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "This, you, us, this space, this is the reminder of why I started." Emma swallowed hard, her throat thick with emotion. Before she could respond, a knock sounded against the glass door. They both turned to see a familiar figure standing outside, her hands fidgeting nervously with the strap of her purse. "Ivy." Emma's heart leapt. She hurried over, unlocking the door and pulling it open. "Ivy!" she exclaimed, genuinely happy to see her. "What are you doing here?" Ivy stepped inside hesitantly, glancing around the dusty space with wide eyes. Someone from Southern Jade mentioned that you were leaving," Ivy said, cheeks flushing pink, "and that you might be starting something new." Emma exchanged a glance with Daniel, who gave a small, encouraging nod. "We are," Emma said, her voice warm. "It's early. Nothing's official yet, but yes." Ivy hesitated, twisting her purse strap tighter between her fingers. I wanted to say, if you're looking for help, I'd love to be part of it." Emma's chest tightened with a surge of gratitude. "You're serious?" Daniel asked, stepping forward. Ivy nodded quickly. "I don't want to be somewhere that judges people by the shoes they wear, or how much their card swipes for. I want to be somewhere that feels right." Emma smiled so wide it hurt. "Then you're exactly the kind of person we need," she said. Ivy's face lit up, and for a moment, the dusty, half-finished space seemed to glow with possibility. Daniel clapped his hands once, the sound echoing off the empty walls. "Well then," he said, grinning, "let's get to work." And just like that, standing in the bones of a building that had yet to become their dream, Emma realized something she hadn't fully understood until this moment. They weren't just building a store. They were building a place for people to belong. A place she had spent her whole life searching for, and now, finally, was helping to create. The faint sound of hammers and saws buzzed through the open windows of the shop as the first real signs of life started to take shape inside. Fresh paint covered the walls, soft and warm like the early morning sky, and the battered old floor had been sanded smooth, the rich wood grain finally breathing again. Emma stood near the front window, her hands dusted with paint, a clipboard balanced on her arm. She watched Ivy rearranging the first few pieces in the display case, delicate jade pendants, simple silver bands, a few handcrafted bracelets that gleamed in the afternoon light. Each piece chosen not for its price, but for its story. Daniel's voice called from the back. "Emma, can you come here for a second?" She set the clipboard down and made her way past the half-unpacked boxes toward the back room. Daniel stood over a small desk they had salvaged from a local antique shop, a frown creasing his brow. His phone was lying on the desk, a text message glowing on the screen. Emma caught the look on his face and her stomach twisted. "What is it?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He picked up the phone and handed it to her. Emma read the text slowly, each word slicing deeper than the last. "Josephine Lane is hosting a private Southern Jade Gala next weekend. Invitation only. Media will be there. Looks like they're unveiling a new direction, highlighting exclusivity, prestige, and loyalty to the brand." Emma's throat went dry. She looked up at Daniel. "They're trying to bury you." Daniel gave a small, humorless smile. "They're trying to make a statement. Show everyone that they're still the real deal, that we're the ones who don't belong." Emma's chest burned. The old ache of being overlooked, being dismissed, came roaring back so fast it nearly knocked the air out of her lungs. She shook her head, the anger tightening her voice. "You built half of what they're standing on. And now they're pretending you never mattered." Daniel's hand brushed lightly against her arm, grounding her. "Let them." Emma stared at him, stunned. "You can't just—" "I'm not fighting their game," Daniel said quietly. "I'm building something they can't touch." Emotion clogged her throat. She wanted to believe that. She wanted it to be enough, but old wounds had a way of bleeding when you least expected it. She turned away, her hand tightening around the edge of the desk. "It's not fair." "I know," he said simply. The weight of it pressed down on her, heavy and sharp. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing the hurt to settle into something manageable. "I just hate the way they make you feel small," she whispered. Daniel stepped closer, his presence a steady warmth at her back. His hands settled lightly on her shoulders, his voice low against her ear. "I've never felt bigger than when I'm standing next to you." Emma let out a shaky laugh, wiping at her eyes. She turned slowly to face him, finding the quiet certainty in his gaze that had anchored her so many times before. "You really mean that?" she asked, her voice breaking on the last word. He didn't smile. He just nodded once. "Steady. Sure. I mean it with everything I have." The front door creaked open, and Ivy's voice floated down the hallway. "We've got company." Emma startled slightly, pulling herself together. Daniel squeezed her hand once before letting go. When they emerged into the main room, Emma's heart lurched. Chloe Fairfax stood by the front counter, a designer handbag slung over her arm like armor. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped rhythmically against the glass case as she surveyed the store with a look that said everything she didn't bother to speak out loud. Emma swallowed hard, the familiar sting of inadequacy prickling at her skin. Daniel stepped smoothly in front of her, his posture easy but firm, protective. "Can we help you?" he asked, polite but cool. Chloe smiled, slow and sharp. "I was just curious," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Word travels fast around here." Emma stayed silent, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. Chloe's eyes flicked around the shop, her gaze lingering on the simple displays, the unpolished floors, the absence of anything flashy or ostentatious. "It's cute," Chloe said finally, her smile growing thinner. "Very humble." Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "It's honest." Chloe tilted her head, feigning surprise. "Well, good luck with that." She turned on her heel, the door swinging closed behind her with a soft, final chime. Emma stood frozen, the taste of humiliation bitter in her mouth. Daniel reached for her hand again, lacing their fingers together. "Let them watch," he said, his voice low and sure. "Let them talk." Emma blinked back the burn in her eyes. Because he was right. They didn't need the approval of a world built on appearances. They were building something else, something real. And even if it took everything they had, even if the world chose to look away, they would keep going, together. The morning light crept through the tall windows of the shop, brushing soft gold across the newly polished floors. Emma stood behind the counter, arranging a row of delicate jade earrings with careful hands. Every piece had a story. Every display whispered of beginnings, of second chances. She glanced up to see Daniel standing by the door, clipboard in hand, his brow furrowed as he studied the list of final tasks before opening day. The quiet focus in his expression made her heart tighten with a fierce, protective love. They were so close. Days away from unlocking the door to the world, inviting it in, showing everyone what they had built from nothing but heart and grit. Yet beneath the excitement, a current of tension hummed, undeniable and gathering strength. The Southern Jade Gala was tonight. Emma set down the last earring carefully, her fingers trembling slightly. Daniel caught her hesitation immediately. He set his clipboard aside and crossed the room to her, reaching for her hands. "Nervous?" he asked, voice low. Emma gave a shaky laugh, terrified. He squeezed her fingers gently. "You don't have to be." She bit her lip, searching his eyes. "They're going to be there. Chloe, Josephine, all of them. They'll be showing off everything they think we're not." Daniel's mouth curved into a smile, slow and unbothered. "Good. Let them." Emma shook her head, feeling the old fear curling in her stomach. "But What if they convince people we don't matter, that we're just some small shop trying to play dress-up? Daniel's expression softened. He brushed her hair back behind her ear with a tenderness that nearly undid her. "Emma," he said, voice quiet but fierce, "we don't have to convince anyone. Our work will speak for itself." Her throat tightened painfully. "I know," she whispered, "but it still hurts." Daniel pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, holding her against his chest. She listened to the steady beat of his heart, grounding her, centering her. "You're allowed to feel it," he murmured. "You're just not allowed to let it stop you." Emma nodded against him, drawing in a slow, shaking breath. They stood there for a long moment, letting the silence fill the space between heartbeats. Finally, Daniel pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. "I had an idea," he said, his voice turning lighter. "A little something unexpected." Emma raised an eyebrow, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth despite the ache inside her. "Oh?" He pulled a slim black box from his jacket pocket and handed it to her. Emma blinked, confused. She opened the box carefully and gasped. Inside, nestled against soft velvet, was the jade heart necklace from the Gilded Lily, the one Daniel had shown her that day when everything had begun to change. Only now, it wasn't alone. Attached to the chain was a small, delicate gold charm engraved with a single word. "Begin." Tears blurred her vision instantly. "You remembered," she whispered. Daniel smiled, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. "How could I forget?" Emma lifted the necklace out of the box, the jade catching the morning light, throwing soft green reflections onto her skin. She closed her fingers around it, anchoring herself. "Will you wear it tonight?" Daniel asked, his voice gentle. Emma nodded, too choked up to speak, because somehow, without her even asking, Daniel had given her exactly what she needed, not armor, not protection, but a reminder. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Hours later, as the sky turned velvet and the city lights flickered to life, Emma stood in front of the shop's old mirror, fastening the necklace around her neck. She smoothed her simple dress with trembling hands, staring at her reflection. The jade heart rested just above her collarbone, the gold charm catching the light. "Begin." She met her own gaze in the mirror, something new sparking there. Strength, certainty. Daniel appeared behind her, his hands settling lightly on her shoulders, his eyes meeting hers in the reflection. "You ready?" he asked. Emma smiled, a small, steady thing that felt like a revolution. More than ready. They left the shop together, stepping into the night, the air crisp with the promise of change. And somewhere deep inside her, Emma knew, no matter what waited for them at that gala, no matter how many whispered judgments or cold smiles, they had already won. Because they had chosen to begin. The gala shimmered like a mirage as Emma and Daniel approached the grand entrance of the Charleston Historic Hotel. Golden lights wrapped the towering columns. Music floated through the open doors, and sleek black cars lined the street like a parade of wealth and importance. Emma's heels clicked against the stone steps, her hand tightly gripping Daniel's. Beneath the soft fabric of her simple navy dress, her heart raced so loudly she wondered if he could hear it. "You're doing great," Daniel murmured, leaning closer as they ascended the last few steps. Emma gave a tiny nod, swallowing hard. She could already feel the weight of glances brushing against her, sizing her up, measuring her against a set of rules she had no interest in following anymore. Inside, the ballroom stretched out in a glittering display, chandeliers dripping with crystals, champagne flutes clinking against manicured nails, a sea of silk dresses and tailored suits. It was beautiful, yes, but it was a beauty that felt cold, calculated. A few heads turned as Daniel and Emma stepped in. Conversation stuttered for just a beat before picking up again, too loud, too rehearsed. Emma spotted Chloe across the room instantly, her platinum hair gleaming under the chandeliers. She wore a gown that probably cost more than Emma's car, her laughter floating high and brittle above the crowd. Beside her, Josephine stood stiffly, clutching a glass of champagne, her sharp eyes scanning the room like a queen surveying her court. It didn't take long for them to notice Daniel and Emma. Chloe's smile tightened. Josephine's brow lifted, just slightly, a silent message clear as glass. You don't belong here. Emma's fingers curled tighter around Daniel's. He leaned down, his voice brushing warm against her ear. Let them look. Emma lifted her chin. She wasn't here for them. A man in a dark suit approached them, Harrison Green, his expression unreadable. Daniel, Harrison said smoothly. Emma, I wasn't expecting you tonight. Daniel's smile was polite, sharp at the edges. We thought it might be educational. Harrison gave a short, dry chuckle. It's certainly something. He glanced around the glittering room. Josephine's been very thorough in shaping the evening. Emma caught the edge in his tone. Respectful but not admiring. A small group of reporters stood near the back, cameras slung over their shoulders, not openly recording but very much observing. Waiting. Emma's stomach twisted. Daniel noticed. He squeezed her hand lightly. Remember why we're here, he whispered. Emma nodded, focusing on the steady beat of his voice, the anchor it offered. Suddenly, a soft chime rang through the room. The crowd hushed slightly, attention swinging toward a small raised platform where Josephine now stood, a champagne flute in her hand. Good evening, everyone, she said, her voice amplified by hidden speakers. Thank you for joining us for a celebration of Southern Jade & Co.'s bright future. Applause rippled through the room, polite, but muted. Emma's heart sank as Josephine continued, her words carefully crafted, each syllable dipped in honey and steel. We are entering a new era, Josephine said, her gaze sweeping the room. One focused on excellence, on exclusivity, on maintaining the high standards that have made us a symbol of true prestige. She didn't need to say it outright. Everyone here knew exactly who and what she was talking about. The message was clear. Southern Jade's doors were for the chosen few, the ones who looked a certain way, spent a certain way, played the game a certain way. Emma felt her cheeks burn. The memories of the boutique, of the cold glances and quiet humiliations, came flooding back. But then she felt Daniel's thumb brush the back of her hand, a tiny, steadying motion, and she remembered. They weren't standing here begging for acceptance. They had already walked away. Josephine lifted her glass high. To the future, she said, to excellence without compromise. Glasses clinked around the room. Daniel didn't raise his. Emma didn't either. Instead, Daniel turned to her, his voice low and sure. Let's go. Emma hesitated, her body locked tight with nerves. Leaving now would be seen as a statement, a refusal. But maybe that was exactly what it needed to be. She nodded once. Hand in hand, they moved through the crowd, Daniel guiding her with gentle pressure at her back. Heads turned, whispers stirred. Emma kept her eyes forward, her steps steady. When they reached the exit, she glanced back just once. She caught Chloe watching her, a smirk curling her mouth. Emma almost faltered. But then she saw Ivy, sweet, shy Ivy, standing off to the side, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her eyes wide with something like hope. Emma met her gaze, held it, and smiled. Because this wasn't the end of the story, it was only the beginning. Outside, the cool night air wrapped around them, sharp and clean. Emma let out a shaky breath, feeling a strange, fierce freedom unfurl inside her. Daniel turned to her, his smile soft and full of something steady and infinite. "You were perfect," he said. Emma laughed, a breathless, relieved sound. "I didn't do anything," she said. "You stayed true," Daniel corrected. "That's everything." He slipped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Together, they walked into the night, leaving the glittering false promises behind them, and stepping boldly toward a future they were building with their own hands, their own hearts. A future where they didn't just belong, they led. The small brass bell above the door chimed as Emma stepped into the shop the next morning, the cool air tinged with fresh paint and the soft, earthy scent of polished wood. She stood there for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around her, feeling the shift in the air, not just in the room, but inside herself. This space didn't feel like a project anymore. It felt like a beginning, a true one. Daniel stood at the back, adjusting the final shelf against the wall. He turned when he heard the door, his face lighting up with that easy, steady smile that always seemed to find her no matter what storm they were walking through. "How's my favorite rebel this morning?" he teased. Emma laughed, her voice still hoarse from the emotions of the night before. Tired. Happy. Terrified. "Perfect combination," he said, crossing the room to meet her. He brushed a kiss against her forehead. "Means you're right where you're supposed to be." She leaned into him for a moment, closing her eyes, anchoring herself in his warmth. Then she pulled back, steeling herself. "Today's the day, isn't it?" Daniel nodded. "Grand opening in 3 hours." Emma swallowed, looking around at the displays. Simple, elegant, full of heart. Not flashy, not hollow, real. Ivy appeared from the back room, her arms full of freshly printed brochures. She beamed when she saw Emma. "Everything's ready," Ivy said, a hint of nerves trembling behind her excitement. "Do you think people will come?" Emma opened her mouth, then hesitated. Because the truth was, she didn't know. There were no guarantees, no glossy promises here, only hope, only the work they had poured into this place with trembling hands and stubborn hearts. Daniel answered first. "They'll come," he said simply. Emma met Ivy's hopeful gaze and smiled. "They'll come," she echoed. The hours passed in a blur of final preparations, adjusting displays, straightening tags, tying tiny bows on the gift boxes stacked near the register. Emma stood by the front window, fiddling with the jade heart necklace around her neck, when she saw the first people approaching. Her heart slammed against her ribs. A young couple hand in hand, an older woman in a wide-brimmed hat, a mother with a toddler balanced on her hip. Ordinary people, real people, the ones they had built this place for. Daniel stepped up beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. "Ready?" Emma drew in a breath, feeling the old fear stir. The voice that whispered she wasn't enough, that she would never be enough. She tightened her hand around Daniel's and silenced it. "I'm ready," she said. The bell above the door chimed again as the first customers stepped inside. Emma pasted on her best smile, but it wasn't fake. It was small and real and trembling with everything she was carrying inside her. The woman in the hat paused by the front table, her fingers lingering over a small, hand-carved jade bracelet. She turned to Emma, her eyes crinkling with kindness. "This is beautiful," she said. "You don't see craftsmanship like this anymore." Emma's throat tightened. She managed a nod. "Thank you. We believe every piece should have a story." The woman smiled and continued browsing. The shop began to fill slowly, not with the buzzing, posturing crowd from Southern Jade, but with people who walked softly, who looked carefully, who lingered not because of price tags, but because something here spoke to them. Emma caught sight of Ivy, Her face lit up with joy as she helped a young man pick out a bracelet for his sister's graduation gift. She turned to find Daniel watching her, his expression unreadable. She moved to him, heart pounding. "What?" He shook his head, smiling slowly. "Just proud of you." Emma blinked back the sudden sting in her eyes. "Of us." He nodded, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small slip of paper. Curious, Emma unfolded it. It was a simple quote, typed neatly. "We don't build for the ones who judge from the sidelines. We build for the ones who walk through the door and find a place they didn't know they were missing." Emma stared at it, her chest swelling painfully with pride and love, and something bigger than both. Outside the windows, Charleston carried on, carriages clattering down cobblestone streets, sweetgrass basket sellers calling out their wares, the breeze off the harbor curling through the open door. Inside their little shop, their dream had begun to breathe. And so had Emma. She looked around at the people touching the jade, admiring the silver, lingering at the counter where Ivy wrapped a purchase with careful hands. She turned back to Daniel, her voice thick with emotion. "We did it," she whispered. Daniel leaned down, his forehead brushing against hers. "No," he said quietly. "You did." Emma smiled through her tears, the jade heart at her throat warm against her skin. The world they had left behind might never understand them. But here, in this small, sunlit space, they had created something true, and it was only just beginning. The sun dipped low behind the Charleston rooftops, casting long, honey-colored shadows across the quiet street. The day had ended with a slow, steady hum, no rush, no chaos, just the soft shuffle of happy customers and the lingering scent of fresh flowers placed at the counter by an old man who said the shop felt like memory and hope all wrapped together. Emma stood alone by the window now, the last glow of the evening spilling across the floor. Her fingers traced the outline of the jade heart at her neck, the gold charm warm against her skin. Behind her, Daniel finished locking up, the soft click of the door sounding final and sure. He crossed the room to her, slipping his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin lightly on her shoulder. For a long moment, they just stood there, wrapped in the heavy, beautiful silence that only came after a dream had been fought for and found. Emma closed her eyes, letting herself lean back into him. "I used to think," she said quietly, "that I had to be someone else to belong." Daniel pressed a kiss into her hair. "You never had to change a thing." A soft laugh escaped her, full of disbelief and wonder. "It's strange, isn't it? Everything they tried to make me feel small about. It's what made this place real." He turned her gently to face him, his hands framing her face. "They were building walls," he said. "You built a door." Emma felt her throat tighten with emotion, the force of it stealing her breath for a moment. She placed her hands over his. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me when I didn't even know I was worth being seen." Daniel's eyes softened, something deep and timeless flickering there. "You were never invisible to me," he said. Outside, the city settled into night. The distant sound of laughter floating through the warm air, the rhythmic slap of waves against the old harbor stones. Emma looked around the shop, at the simple displays, the stories folded into every piece, the quiet pride stitched into every corner. And she knew. This wasn't just a store. It was a reminder. That value isn't decided by labels or price tags. That real wealth was measured by the hearts you touched, by the love you chose again and again when the world told you to give up. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn scrap of paper. He unfolded it carefully and held it out to her. Emma smiled when she saw it. The same words he had given her months ago. "You're priceless, too." Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't look away. Instead, she stepped closer, laying her forehead gently against his, breathing in the quiet, steady rhythm of a life they had built together, not out of perfection, but out of honesty. "I believe it now," she whispered. Daniel smiled against her skin. Good. And under the soft golden lights of the shop they had dreamed into existence, Emma Carter finally, fully, truly understood. She had never needed to fit into anyone else's world. She had always been enough to create her own. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way.